Were humans built to follow? Evolution made us followers for a reason. Coordinated action has always been key to survival. But the best followers don't just obey, they monitor, match, engage, and walk away when it's time. Today we'll be discussing the evolutionary perspective on followership. Before we dive into this theory, I want to pause and acknowledge something. We're looking at an evolutionary perspective on leadership and followership. I know the term evolutionary can raise eyebrows or even resistance, especially if your personal or religious beliefs don't align with traditional evolutionary theory. But the good thing is you don't need to believe in evolution stretching back millions of years to get something out of the evolutionary perspective. At its core, the theory is asking, why do we follow leaders? And more importantly, how did the way we follow or lead get shaped by the environments that we've lived in over time? Whether you believe humans have been around for 200,000 years or 2,000 years, it's still true that we've had to survive, organize, and make decisions in all kinds of groups. And evolutionary psychology is just one lens, a tool that can help us explore how our survival patterns may still show up in today's workplaces, teams, and communities. I invite you to approach this conversation with curiosity. You don't have to agree with every part of it to consider what evolutionary psychology might reveal about human behavior and maybe about your own experiences with leaders and followers. All right, let's get started. The basic premise for today's discussion is that humans have an adaptive and flexible follower psychology that allows us to coordinate actions with others when it's beneficial to us, select and follow the right kinds of leaders under the right conditions, determine an appropriate level of engagement with the leader, and switch from being a follower to a leader when it's appropriate. This presentation is based on research from two authors. The first is Nicholas Bastardoz from the University of Lausanne. He's a faculty of business and economics in Switzerland. And the second is Mark Van Vugt from the University of Oxford, where he studies evolutionary psychology and leadership. Together, they published a landmark paper in the Leadership Quarterly, offering an evolutionary explanation as to why we follow, when we follow, and what kinds of followers we become. This paper bridges biology, psychology, and management to explain followership in a way that most leadership theories don't. The evolutionary perspective sees leadership and followership as adaptive solutions to the various kinds of organizational challenges that are associated with group living. The evolutionary perspective argues that leaders have differential influence on group activities. Differential meaning not all group members influence the group equally. Some individuals have more influence than others when it comes to making decisions, solving problems, and guiding action. Conversely, followers are individuals who adopt the leader's goals temporally or structurally and freely accept the influence of the leader. The most important part is freely accepting. This theory argues that we freely accept the influence of leaders because either it's the best strategy among the alternatives or because we don't have any other credible alternatives. Both of these definitions require distinguishing leadership from dominance and followership from coercion. When individuals are not freely conferring influence to another individual, a dominance hierarchy ensues, and that's not what we're talking about here. It's leadership that's given and followership that's freely accepted. One of the most important questions about leadership and followership for evolutionary psychology is, why do we follow? And there are a few different reasons for this, according to our authors. The first is for survival. Previously, being excluded meant death. Humans evolved as social beings, and belonging to a group is better than going alone. Group membership then has its benefits. Followers have more resources, safety, and success than when they act alone. A second reason is because leading can be dangerous. Leaders may face higher risks, fewer rewards, and more conflict costs. The person in charge has often been the target of attacks. They may receive fewer rewards in that they are allowing others to feast before they feast, and they experience conflict costs due to what can be internal strife within the group. A third reason is because we can't attract followers, so we kind of have to be a follower ourselves because other people won't follow us as the leader. A fourth reason is we follow to learn. Following is seen in evolutionary psychology as leadership training. It reminds me of The Lion King when Simba follows his dad around to see what it's like being king. Before, A final reason we follow is because having too many leaders is chaotic. When there's too many voices trying to be heard, it's hard to make decisions and it's hard to know the best thing to do. I really like this flowchart from Bastardoz and Van Vugt that explains when we follow. The first question is if an individual is going alone or with a group. If they're going alone, the next question is the individual followed? If the individual isn't followed, they emerge as a lone individual. If the individual is followed, they emerge as a leader. Going back to our individual going alone or as a group, if they go as a group, the question becomes whether or not they're willing to lead. If yes, the question then goes back to, do they attract followers? If yes, they emerge as a leader. If no, they emerge as a follower. If they're not willing to lead, then of course they emerge as a follower. Evolutionary psychology argues that followership is triggered by certain cues or inputs. Something in the environment has to provide a threat or an opportunity that jolts us to do something. And then we respond by showing certain adaptive outputs. In other words, we coordinate with a leader who seems able to manage the threat or the opportunity that's been presented in the environment. Another interesting question our authors address with evolutionary psychology is who follows. And the perspective suggests that individuals are more likely to emerge as followers if one of three conditions exists. 1, if the benefits to leading are relatively low. If there's no fame, fortune, or feelings of goodwill that come from being a leader, we may not want to do it. The second is if the costs of leading are relatively high. If everybody's mad at the leader and their family is in danger, or it'll be a ton of work to be the leader, maybe we just don't want to. The third condition is that we may have an inability to lead or attract followers. There are 3 different things that we might lack that will influence whether or not we become a follower. The first is physical capital. Especially with an evolutionary psychology perspective, if we don't have the height, the strength, the formidability to be a leader, people may just not see us as very leaderly and may not see us as someone worthy of following. Psychological capital is related to our personality and knowledge. Our personality capital refers to the characteristics that make us likely to signal interest in leading or with desirable properties of a leader in the eyes of the followers. Personality capital can also include benevolence because followers fear being exploited by untrustworthy individuals. So if you're seen as benevolent, we may be more likely to follow you. Knowledge capital refers to information, intelligence, and expertise, and these qualities have historically and currently helped group members attain their goals. More intelligent and skilled individuals can identify coordination challenges, offer successful strategies for cooperation, and can influence others regarding the quality of the leadership strategy. A final thing that followers may lack is social capital, and social capital is related to our relationships. Specifically, an embodiment of the group's values and identities. If a person isn't seen as being someone who is clearly in the in-group and has the characteristics of what we value in the in-group, they may not be someone we turn to as a leader. Remember, with our evolutionary psychology perspective, our followers are freely giving their followership. So the question of how we follow becomes important. Followers match their followership style to the leader's style and the situation. Think about it. When someone tries to lead by putting fear in you or showing dominance, many of us shut down. If they lead with, wisdom and sage advice, we pay attention. If they lead with passion, we follow by putting our hearts into it. Our follower styles shift with the leader's energy. If there's a dominance-based leadership style, they may lead with coercion and control, and we may be more submissive or compliant. If there's a prestige-based leadership style, they're leading with expertise and skill, so we may be curious and more learning-oriented. And charisma-based leadership shows emotion and identity. Followers may respond with a lot of passion and loyalty to that charismatic leader. Another element of how we follow that our authors pointed out is that humans evolved in egalitarian tribes that managed the risk of power abuses. Egalitarian, remember, means believing all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Therefore, we have different leveling mechanisms to control abuses of power. Those include things like gossip. We may think gossip is kind of pointless catty chatter, but in the past and now, it's served as a very important function in evaluating leaders. We also have public criticism, holding our leaders accountable in a public forum. That happened literally in a public square in the past, and now it happens online and in the square too. We also have just general disobedience, not doing what's been told, and then removal of our leaders in extreme cases when their power isn't benefiting us. Followers monitor leaders and hold them accountable. The question becomes then, why do we stay? And our authors argue there are 4 evolutionary drivers that influence whether or not we stay. The first is outcome satisfaction. Are we as followers getting our fair share of the rewards? The second is procedural fairness, which is related to if the decisions that are being made are fair and inclusive. Another reason we stay is alternative options. If there's not another leader we can turn to, we're pretty much stuck with staying. And investment. How much have we already put into this relationship with the leader, and would it be beneficial for us to give up on that investment? Therefore, in deciding when to stay, our followers determine commitment and level of engagement. Evolutionary psychology would argue that evolution shaped us to assess when commitment to a leader is worthwhile. Now that we understand why we follow, when we follow, who follows, and how we follow, let's turn to the evolution of followership psychology. Followers emerged in many species to solve basic coordination challenges. A key challenge was group movement. If we're moving around to find access to resources, food, water, shelter, we may need a leader then to guide us, and therefore we may need to actively follow. Second, then, situations of conflict of interest gave rise to socially dominant leaders in non-human primates that constrained followers. Then, our followers regained control over dominant leaders in egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies through the ability to form coalitions. Followers then selected pro-social and prestigious leaders who they could trust and could culturally learn from. The last formal phase of followership evolution is followers investing power in formal leaders and institutions like kings and CEOs to successfully manage the complexity of large-scale cooperation and living. Our authors argue there could potentially be a 6th phase of followership evolution where our formal leaders tend to abuse their power to privilege themselves and their kin at the detriment of exploited followers. Bastardoz and Van Vugt recognize that human instincts can lead us astray, and they introduce this term, the evolutionary mismatch. Our followership instincts were built for small tribes and not these complex modern systems that we live in. Our instincts were shaped when we lived with a small group of people where everybody knew everybody and you knew your leader personally. Today, we often follow people we don't even know or people who don't even deserve our followership. And evolution didn't prepare us for LinkedIn and corporate politics, so sometimes we follow the wrong people. When it comes to following the wrong people, our authors say that we follow charisma and physical presence even when it's irrelevant. You can think of people online who talk a good talk or who look pretty good when they're talking, and we have a tendency to follow them. Our modern leaders are often appointed top down, not chosen by the group, chosen by other people at the top, who may not have the best interest of followers in mind. We also lack leveling mechanisms, meaning that bad leaders can stay in power. We also have unequal reward systems that decrease our engagement. You can think about CEO pay versus worker pay. There's a lot of resources that CEOs have access to that can help them stay in power, and workers don't have a lot of time, energy, and resources to push back. I want to round this presentation out by reviewing some of the propositions that our authors put forward as things that evolutionary psychology would say about followership and leadership. Followership emerges when coordination or cooperation is beneficial. Followership is underpinned by evolved psychological mechanisms or mental algorithms for coordination. Individuals will emerge as followers if one of 3 conditions is true: if they lack the motivation to be a leader, if the costs of leading outweigh the benefits, and if they lack physical, psychological, or social capital. A few more. Evolved follower psychology relies on personal and situational cues to select leaders, and adaptive followership psychology contains mechanisms to detect and manage exploitation risks of leaders. Followership styles match with particular leadership styles, and followers' engagement results from the followers' satisfaction with the coordination outcomes, the fairness of leaders' procedures, the presence of alternative options, and followers' investments in the leader-follower relationship. Although the term evolutionary might have put you on edge, I hope you can see how this perspective sees good followership as not weak but very strategic. Coordinating our actions has always been key to survival, and the best followers don't just obey the leaders who are in charge. They participate actively in selecting the leader, following the leader, and determining when the leader should no longer be in power.